And as you can tell, we're eager to start the discussion. Dr. Ivey.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience as we got the program together this evening, and to our technicians for solving the problems that we needed to have solved. Cancer. We approach that word with many different thoughts, many different feelings. And those of you in the audience and those of us here who have had the experience, ourselves or a family, have been changed because of cancer. And so this evening we're going to have a conversation focused around the religious and spiritual issues, dimensions, challenges, and growth opportunities that the experience of cancer brings to persons. Welcome to the conversation. We're going to have a conversation here for a few minutes. We will then turn to you and invite you to have a conversation with us, to ask questions you may have, to share thoughts that you may have. So be prepared to join us in a few minutes. And so I want to begin, and since Jane is closest to me here, I will start here, and we'll kind of begin this way, and I don't know what will happen later, so we shall see. But we can begin here. Jane, kind of begin your story a little bit with how you learned about your cancer, and what were some of the initial changes that cancer brought to your life?
Well, briefly, I was diagnosed in 2000. After coming back from sabbatical, it was kind of a bad experience for me, with an abdominal cancer that's quite rare, called pseudomyxoma peritonei. And what I had to do was learn what this cancer was and what the mortality issues were. And then, as a result of a hormone replacement therapy that I was given after a very serious surgery, I developed breast cancer in 2004, so I've had cancer twice. And I think that for me, I can say initially that my spiritual life changed. I'm a single parent. I had at the time a much younger child. And so the particular challenges that this presented to me were to try to maintain a sense of balance and equanimity in my life that had been really quite upset in a number of ways. So at least that gives you a start, perhaps, for my story.
Thank you. Appreciate that beginning. Perhaps a similar kind of statement from you, Tony, as to what changed in those first days for you as you learned of your cancer.
Well, all of my doctors had encouraged me, starting at age 40, to make sure that you go and get your colonoscopy at age 50. And I'm wondering, why, is it that serious? I didn't really know too much about cancer. I didn't know really a whole lot of anything about cancer. And so every year I would go and get my checkup through the fire department, and they would keep reminding me, and so did my regular doctor. Well, at age 50, of course, I did just as they had asked me to go and get checked, and I was a healthy firefighter, working out, eating well, so I thought, and had no signs and symptoms of cancer. But when I went in for my colonoscopy, they ended up finding a miniature football in my stomach. I had no idea. I didn't have any bleeding, again, no stomach cramps, no signs, symptoms. And when I woke up, my sister and my wife told me I had stage 3 cancer after they did the biopsy. And it was a very shocking moment. It made time stand still. So your mind spins, and what do? For me, the only thing I could do was stop, be still, and lean on my faith. And that's what ended up getting me through the entire process. Individuals would say things, doctors would say things, but I had to lean on the Lord to get me through that process. And through that, my faith increased. I found myself encouraged by others, having prayer by others, but I found that when I shared my story with others, it even made them feel better than I was feeling at the time. So it really helped me a great deal.
contrasting stories here, aren't they? A young mother having equanimity thrown up in the air. A young man doing what we all should do, right? Preventative screenings. You're up to date on yours, right? What we should all do are preventative screenings. All of a sudden, heads start spinning.
Exactly.
And then have to find a new place. It affects all of us differently at the beginning.
Yeah.
Jan, would you share with us your beginning and how spiritually that affected you?
And before you start, would you move the microphone over with either one? Just as long as we can hear you.
All right. Well, when I got my diagnosis, I had a mammogram. I had triple negative breast cancer. People who don't know what it is, it starts off little and can just light like a firewall and just kind of grow quickly. And I had a normal mammogram in July. I'm at the lake showering, and I feel a lump, and I'm like, no big deal. Because I do breast exams for a living. I mean, I touch breasts every day. I'm a family nurse practitioner. I educate, health is in my title. So, I don't have cancer. So I didn't think much about it. And then I felt this presence, if you will. It came up again. I'm showering and I'm toweling off. You think by then I'd do a breast exam, but I didn't. And so all of a sudden I feel this, and I say out loud in the bathroom, it's like, okay, I will get it checked out, but off my back. And my daughter is walking by and she's like, who are you talking to, Mom? And I'm like, no one. So I called my friend, Julie Schneiders, who's a great nurse practitioner. I said, hey, can you feel my boob? I was like, come on. She's like, okay, come on over. And so she's like, we need to get this checked out. I'm like, oh, no, it's no big deal. And then over a bottle of Kendall Jackson white wine, she gives me my lab report, and she goes, this is kind of serious. But I had a normal mammogram. She's like, I know, this is how triple negative works. And not to be crib, I did a WTF. I mean, I wasn't leaning on anything. I was running around with my hair on fire going, I thought, oh my God, if that's a prayer, I was praying. And it was just really, it just sucked the life out of me. It's kind of like when your underwear becomes a thong, It's like, okay. And so I kind of dealt with it through humor. And so then and then I went fetal. I wasn't going to tell anybody at all, and I thought I should tell my dad the night before the biopsy, just in case if I died on the table or something, because we have anesthesia issues. And that kind of hit me, that I needed to share my story. Because up until then, cause I'm a single mom, keep everything normal, and no one was going to know. I was going to get a cutout, radiation, go my merry way, but, life had a different way.
Thank you. A very famous author says one of the primary prayers that any of us prays is, help! And it sounds like that for you, that was the beginning of that real spiritual disruption in your life. Help.
Yes.
Help. Lisa, perhaps you could share with us a beginning story.
Okay. I was in a position where I was not working, or actually working a temporary job. Eric and I had both lost jobs that were well-paying jobs, so we were in a tight financial situation. I did not have health insurance, and I found a lump under my arm. And I initially thought, oh, have I had a cold, and maybe this is an enlarged lymph node, because it was under my arm. So I ignored it for about 6 weeks, and then I kind of casually mentioned it to my sister-in-law, who's here in the audience and who is in charge of everybody at this church and in our family. And so she said to me, you need to go check that out. Why don't you call the Little Red Door Cancer Agency? And I did, and they were able to arrange for me to have a breast exam and a mammogram. I went to have the breast exam, and the nurse practitioner did not feel anything other than the lump that was under my arm, did not feel any lump in my breast or anything. She said that, oh, I think this is probably just an enlarged lymph node, but just to be sure, we'll send you to have a mammogram. So I went to have the mammogram, and on the mammogram, they saw something questionable and said, we think you should have a biopsy now. And so had the biopsy, and 2 days later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, triple negative as well. And so, but in the days between that biopsy and waiting for the results, I was actually offered a job, and I was actually on the phone talking about logistics for starting orientation when the doctor's office called and said, can you come in? And I said, well, I'm kind of busy right now. And didn't want to go. But I said I would come in, and my sister-in-law went with me again, and I got the diagnosis, but in my mind just started rushing, like, oh, what am I going to do? I don't have health insurance, our money's tight, I can't pay for treatment, I guess I'm just going to wing this. But immediately the nurse practitioner said, but the good news is that when you called the Little Red Door, they had enrolled you in a special program called the Breast and Cervical Cancer Program, and so that would cover most of the cost of your treatment. And so for me, that was immediate relief, and immediately let me know that, as I've said so often since then, that God had that ram in the bush for me and my family. And so for me, that immediate knowledge just calmed things for me. And I really was never afraid about my survival or whether I would get through treatment or if it'd be too hard. My concern kind of turned to, I have to make this, whatever I'm gonna go through, kind of normal for my children and my husband, and make it seem like I'm not sick. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be at church every Sunday and just keep doing what I did, and I'm not sick, I'm just getting treatments to get rid of this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing the spirituality of the financial concern, because we know that for many cancer patients that finances drive many of the other anxieties that they have. So I really appreciate you risking mentioning that particular part of your anxiety, as well as the trust that you found in the midst of that. As we move through the cancer process, we often find that there are times that challenge our ability to cope with what's going on. And so I'm wondering, Jan, do you remember a particular time during the process that just coping with what was going on for you was really challenging, and how did you either meet or fail to meet that challenge?
That's a good question. I found, I worked through my cancer. At the university, I run the health center at Marian University, and it was the year the H1N1 came out, so I was like, okay, thank you God, I have cancer now, H1N1. And and all these cute little college kids, I mean, they're sniveling and crying and reaching towards you, and you're like, I can't touch you, but so working helped me. But there was one day that we had to quarantine a couple people, and I just kind of hit the wall physically and mentally, and I thought, I can't get the flu, because if I get the H1N1, then I'm really going to die, and I really don't want to die right then. And so I called, again, a good friend of mine, a nurse practitioner, Julie. She popped up and helped out for a day. Then another nurse practitioner, Ann Gang, showed up out of the blue. I didn't even know her. Word was on the street that we needed some help. She showed up. She goes, I'm here to help you. I'm like, who are you? Show me your credentials. Okay. I mean, it just, people came out of the woodwork that you didn't even know. So that is then where my faith walk and spirituality of just those nuggets of goodness, if that makes sense, just rose up without a plan. I mean, that's the one thing, cancer, you don't have a plan, and it yanks you totally out of your nice little outline of your life. I mean, the bottom line is you have no plan. And then if you let go and open up your arms, kind of like how Jesus did on the cross, or how a leaf is floating on a riverbed, and just totally open and actively submit, people will pop up. Things will happen that you had no idea.
Thank you. The spirituality of submission.
That's exactly right. Active submission. Yeah.
And a choice that has to be made in that. What about for you, Tony? Was there a time that coping with the feelings, the emotions, the physical problems were close to overwhelming, and what helped you cope or didn't help you cope?
Well, number one, it's amazing how God will put you in a position to receive a blessing without you even knowing about it. As a firefighter, if I would have had colon cancer on the street, I would have had to retire, take a medical retirement. Little did I know, the good Lord had a blessing for me, and without me asking about it, without me inquiring about a different position on the fire department, the chief of the department found me and offered me a position as a deputy chief of personnel. So I was able to leave fighting fires on the street and work in an office setting. That enabled me to do exactly what you did, be able to work every day until I couldn't work any longer because of the chemotherapy. And I was able to work through that. As I was traveling along through that process, there was one day that I thought I could do exactly that. I thought I could go to the office. I had my chemotherapy with me. I had a 72-hour treatment, so I carried the little bag over my shoulder. And I was in my office and working along on the computer, and it just hit me. I had to stop in my tracks. Could not do anything, didn't have energy to do anything, and my boss walked in the door, and he said, "Tony, I love you, man. Get out of here." Get out of here. I had so many projects that were going on. I had a court case that was getting ready to start. I had so many things on my plate. But again, the good Lord will send someone to you in your time of need and make that difference. So he told me to leave. I did exactly what he said do. I left. But I didn't go home. I went directly to my church and fell down at the altar and just stayed there. Just stayed there because while my head was spinning, no energy, couldn't concentrate, all I could do was throw myself on the altar. Bless God. After that, strength came, power came. I was able to pick myself up, go home. This is beyond my belief. I fixed something to eat, and you know when you have cancer, you don't eat. And if you do eat, you cannot taste it. Everything tasted like aluminum. Yeah. So you had to make it real spicy. You know, put as many types of hot sauce and spices on it as possible. And my spirits were lifted. So the good Lord will provide what you need when you don't even know what you need. And that was such a blessing. Not only leaving suppression, going to administration, but while I was administering my duties, to have someone on the fire department that thought enough of me to allow me to leave and for me to get to that place where I could just give it all to God.
We have different stories, don't we? That's one of the really wonderful things when we start talking honestly, are the different stories that we have. Lisa, perhaps for you, a time that you either struggled to cope or found a coping that you didn't know where it would come from, and it did. Whatever you choose to tell us about that.
And actually I have two, so I'll try to make
you can tell
brief.
two.
Okay. But the one time I did become fearful was when I had what turned out to be an allergic reaction to a chemotherapy treatment, and was actually the exact medicine. And I ended up in the hospital because my fever couldn't be controlled, and because of the fever, I couldn't have my next scheduled chemotherapy treatment. So once I was admitted to the hospital, I started having serious problems breathing, shortness of breath, fluid building up in my lungs, and so the doctors were trying to figure out, is this some kind of strange form of pneumonia, or is this something going on with the lungs? And of course, my thought was, oh, the cancer has spread to my lungs. And then they had an intern come into my hospital room and said, we're going to do a procedure. We're going to stick a tube up your nose and down your throat and down to your lungs. I said, I don't think so. I wasn't having that. So I said, could you send the doctor in and explain what you're going to do? And so they sent the doctor in, and he explained. I said, am I going to be awake during this? He said, well, we'll give you a little bit of a light anesthesia, not full. I said, that's not going to work. I did not want to have that. I can't remember where Eric was, but I know my parents were there, and they kept saying, no, you have to have this. I said, no, nobody's sticking a tube up my nose and down my throat. But after about 3 people talking to me, I agreed to have that done. And as it turned out, it wasn't, no cancer had spread, but I was really fearful of that procedure, as well as being fearful of the cancer spreading. And I can honestly say I think that was the only time throughout my course of treatment that I felt vulnerable about my about survival and whether or not I would be brought through this. But the time that I recall that was probably most difficult for me was actually after I had completed treatment. And my sister-in-law, who had been diagnosed before me, her cancer has started to spread. This is difficult because I don't think I've ever shared this with anybody, but it was right here at church on a Sunday, and her cancer had spread and she was really suffering. And I had been through treatment and I was doing great. And I remember standing out on the sidewalk there just saying, why is this happening? Why is this happening to her? She was diagnosed well before me. She had gotten better, and then all of a sudden it was worse. And here I had gotten through treatment, was working, and I mean, I was not taking any medicine because, as you know, no medicine for triple negative works. So
Right.
not taking any medicine, I was in great health, and it just hurt me to see her suffering. And I just kept on saying, oh, why is this happening to her and not me? And there was my sister-in-law, Debbie, again, out there on the steps, and she said to me, that's not your battle. What God has for her is for her, and what God has for you is for you. And I think about those words so often because that through my experience, I really do believe God has put me in a different place to do what I do now. He's changed me. I'm much more submissive. Before my diagnosis, I was proud to be that superwoman. I did it all. But cancer has a way of bringing you down. You can't do it all. You know, I wasn't working at the time, but I was still trying to run the household. I was getting up every day. I was taking my daughter to school. I was at church every Sunday, other than when I was in the hospital, and I was just trying to keep things normal. But God had a way of showing me that independence is great, but it's good to be able to rely on people, and I did. I relied on my family, my church family, to do things like bringing meals that I might or might not eat. Or, I mean, I had a girlfriend that said, I'm good at cleaning the house, and that's what I like to do. So, I mean, it taught me to allow people to help me.
But that's so hard.
It is, it's hard. Yeah. But it also showed me for now how I can help others. And it also gave me a much better sense of compassion, particularly for people who suffer from chronic diseases, because I kind of think of my time as, okay, I was diagnosed on May the 1st, I had surgery in the middle of May, then I started chemotherapy, and then I finished that in October, and went on to radiation in less than a year. I had gone through my treatment. But there are people who suffer for years and years from, whether it's because of cancer that has metastasized or other illnesses. And I really think about those people a lot now because I can think about a finite period when I struggle with health, but there are people now that struggle for years, and the faith that they show is phenomenal to me.
Dealing with the limits of being human. Illness, cancer in particular, brings us to that, doesn't it?
Right.
I'm going to bring our pastors into the conversation at this point. You have dealt both with your friends here, but as pastors, I'm sure you've had many other folk that you have shepherded through the cancer experience. What one or two things have you found that have been really important as a pastor, as you have been pastor to persons with cancer? Perhaps, Pastor Dwayne, you'd go first with that?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I guess as a pastor, one of the things, or many of the things that I've dealt with and encountered persons with challenges, cancer, I think one of the things is, I remember as Tony and others were speaking, and my mind reflected back, I think when I first came to the city, probably '83, and some of the youth workers had asked me to do a workshop kind of with young teens at the church. And there were a lot of young teens, young boys, and they had someone else to deal with the girls. My job was to deal with the boys. So, and one of the things I got to the boys, I asked them, what did they want to be in life? What did they want to be? And there was some said they wanted to be a doctor, some wanted to be lawyers, some wanted to be engineers. The majority of the boys said, I want to be a firefighter. And after about 4 or 5 went through, and then more, and I was like, firefighter. And so Paul Bonsi said, Pastor, it's Tony Williamson, it's Tony Williamson. But Tony had made such a positive impact upon large numbers of young boys. And I think it's that we've heard from everyone, that positive kind of attitude, that optimism, kind of that I can do it. I can make it through this. This does not have to be the end of my life. And I think that's one of the things that helped, that I've seen that's been such a great strength, is the belief that I can somehow do this. I don't know all the wheres and wherefores. I don't know how exactly I'm going to go through it, but I just know I will do it. And that's been one of the great strengths that I've seen and that I've encountered. Another one is being a pastor. I remember, and I'll be quicker with this one, probably doing my seminary studies. I remember doing some studies regarding the Mayo Clinic, and when I was in Atlanta doing my grad studies, and they would talk about how they did a lot of studies on patients, and some patients with the same challenges, the same identical challenges, and they would note persons who had other people that would come and pray, that somehow those persons did better. And persons who didn't have someone praying sometimes would not do better. And it didn't even matter whether the persons who were praying were strong in the faith, whether they were I don't know, help me, Pastor, a Benny Hinn or someone. It didn't matter, as long as they prayed. And so that was part of my upbringing, that I believed from my dad and from my home, that prayer, the power of prayer, makes a difference.
Thank you. Pastor Eck, what about from your experience, what do you think are 1 or 2 lessons as a pastor in caring for people that really just strikes home with you?
Well, from an early age, I didn't know this once I was as a pastor being faced with the difficulties of parishioners. You don't know it, but as you get a moment to reflect, you actually realize how life prepared you for the moment. And so I wasn't afraid of cancer. I was angry at cancer. My father died from cancer when I was 4 years old. And I always hate that I didn't get to know him like I wanted to. And so in my mind, when Lisa contracted cancer, I had already told myself that however bad it is, I'm going to be present. And so actually, I try to take that type of attitude when you're dealing with the crisis of members, and because really just being present is really such a blessing for people so often. You don't have to have magical words, but if you're just there, it means so much to people. The time that Lisa says when they told her they thought they found some things on her lung, I was at home and I just got out the shower, my cell phone rang, and it was her. It was in the morning, and she was telling me what they had found. And I could already tell that she was concerned. And but before I said, okay, I said, I'm getting dressed and I'm on the way there. And before she hung up the phone, she said, I'm scared. And, I want to tell you, when somebody you love tells you they're scared, and you know that there is nothing you can do to change that situation. There's nothing you can do. And so there I was in my bathrobe on my knees after I hung up the phone from her at the sink praying for our situation. And so all of those things, they force you to, what they force you to do is to realize that this moment is not it's not for you, it's for someone else. And so I try to be what I can be for someone else in that situation. I don't know exactly what it is they need, but I try to be something for someone else in that situation.
To be present, just to be present.
To be present.
It's a wonderful gift that sometimes we can give each other, isn't it?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. There was I shared this with the congregation recently that several years ago there was an older lady. Some of you probably remember a little funeral home on West Street near Crispus Attucks High School called Jacob's Funeral Home. And this was several years ago. I didn't even know that Mr. Jacob's widow was still alive. And the lady who took care of her said, you know, she was restless. She's suffering from Alzheimer's latter stages. And she just wondered if I could come and minister to her. You know, she was already in a nursing home. Sure, love to. And I went up there to spend some time with Mrs. Jacobs. And I'm telling you that speaking to her meant nothing. I didn't have any words for this woman. I opened the Bible and started reading from the Psalms, and this woman who was so restless and wouldn't pay attention to anybody immediately calmed down, immediately. And then when I sang some old hymn that I knew that she would know, the lady who was her caregiver looked at me and said, I can't believe this is happening. And so it's really not. It's not about having something magic to say or do, but just being present, to do what you can do, because it'll be something for them that you can't imagine.
Thank you. Jane, I want to turn back to you with a little bit different question at this point. I happen to know Jane better than some of the other friends here, so she gets a bit of a curveball. Jane, I know part of your scholarly work as a professor has been in writing about illness. And I know one of your books was Women at the Front, which was a story about nurses during the Civil War, and some of that. And then you find yourself in the midst of your own illness. I'm wondering how some of those narratives either spoke to you, scared you. How did your scholarly work and your personal life find themselves joining each other?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I think initially my interest as an historian of medicine during the Civil War caused me to read many narratives written by people who had helped other people suffering during the Civil War. And of course, one never thinks that one oneself will be in that situation. And it was really, I think, through having two cancer experiences for me, that I began to change my focus a bit and look at what people had written in a far more contemporary vein about the condition of being ill and in what way they needed to depend on their practitioners or their spiritual guides and so forth. And of course, this is something that I've applied to my teaching life as well, because I think it's very useful for people to see how the ill represent their own situations. But for me, I think that it wasn't maybe so much about telling my own story, which I have done in a number of different venues at this point, but it was also extrapolating from my personal circumstances to the sort of larger constellation of people out there who have cancer and who have written about the various forms of cancer that they've had. So I'd say that, again, there is a pretty close tie between what's personal and what's professional. But first it begins for me as a kind of professional concern because of my interest in the history of medicine. Then it became very personal, written on the body, if you will. And then after that, I've been able to move back into a kind of personal professional mode, I'd say, with it. And that for me has been, I think, part of the spiritual journey. I take great joy in writing. So it's as if my spiritual products, the things that I've written, are things that I hope can help other people when they encounter cancer themselves. And unfortunately, many of us will do during a lifetime. I think now the statistics are pretty close that 1 out of every 2 people will get some form of cancer during their lifetimes. And that's just a frightening statistic. It's a statistic that I try not to say too much, particularly in the classroom, because I am working with young people, and I think that although it's very difficult to get people to consider the issues surrounding cancer episodes, and particularly how people write about such experiences, it is perhaps something that we need to be careful about. I don't want to frighten people, you know, and have them feel pessimistic before their lives have even begun. So that to me is a somewhat delicate balance. It has to be handled very carefully.
Truth-telling can sometimes be discouraging,
That's
can't
right.
it? With that.
That's right. Yeah.
I bet each of you is thinking about something that you hoped I would ask or you wanted to say that I haven't asked, and I want to give you an opportunity for that. So perhaps, Tony, what would you like to tell us that I haven't given you an opportunity to tell us about your spiritual journey?
Well, I would just like to piggyback on what the pastor said about just being present. That is so important. There's not a lot of words that can be said, not a whole lot of things you can do, but just be there. And that's what my church family did. I was thinking back, I have a port in my chest, and that's where they connected the chemotherapy to go directly into my system. And on one occasion, little did I know, it wasn't all the way in the port. And if you know about the chemotherapy, it's a mixture of poisons. And so when I left for my treatment and went home, when I was in bed that night, it seemed like my chest was a little full, this side of my chest. And so I kept it to myself until that morning. And then when my wife rolled over, she said, "Wait a minute, what's going on?" I said, "Well, I think I might have a little leak." And she said, "What?" So I was rushed to the hospital, to my doctor's office, and a lot of the chemotherapy had spilled into my chest. And when you go through chemo, small things are very, very painful. So if I was to put my hand in the refrigerator, it was almost like it would freeze and drop off. So the nurses had to jump on my chest and pump my chest out, all the poisons out, and put ice packs on it. And so I was in severe pain. And so my wife, number one, she was just there. But then she reminded me of a song that we sing called, oh Lord, I forgot that quick. Smile, smile. Even when things are up or down, keep on smiling. And she just reminded me of that song. She was just there, and that made all the difference in the world. Just being there. She reminded me that I was not traveling through this cancer journey alone, just being there. It was the entire family, and not just my immediate family, but my entire church family, my community of firefighters, just being there. They couldn't do what the doctors needed to do. They couldn't mix anything, but they could be there and they could pray. There were a couple times when I was down and I could just feel some energy coming from somewhere. And then later on, individuals would say, you know, yesterday at 4 o'clock, I thought about you and said a prayer. And I said, I know. That makes a big difference for anyone that's going through it. So, yes, just being there makes a big difference.
Thank you. Lisa, what about for you? Is there part of your story, the journey you would like for us to know about that you haven't had a chance to tell us yet?
Well, I guess what I would say in terms of my experience in spirituality, I commented a little bit about it before, but I honestly felt like that God had already answered prayers right after I got the diagnosis. And throughout my experience, I kind of started saying things like, I'm not sick, or when people would ask about, treatments or things, I'm not sick, I've already been healed, I'm just doing this extra stuff just for extra protection. I've been healed, but I really did believe that once I got that diagnosis and God showed me a way and then had all this support from family and friends, I really did feel like from that point I was healed, and all that chemotherapy and all that was just extra. And I think a lot of people who have cancer honestly just rely on their faith, even when things are happening like what you were going through, or when I had the allergic reaction, that you still have to just fall back on that faith and know that, the doctors might not have known exactly what was going on when I got sick with that allergic reaction, but knowing that whatever it is, God has you covered.
Thank you. Jan, what about for you? What's that?
Well, I agree. God has you covered either way, if you live or die.
Right.
I mean, I didn't have kumbaya moments. I mean, I had holy cow moments, scared moments, and being a single mom moment. I want to be able to see. We'll probably get emotional. My daughter's graduating from high school, and I'm just so happy to see her graduate and to have that opportunity to have a future. And so, cancer. The one thing, if there's any medical provider listening, tell your patient the truth.
Right.
I fired my oncologist, my first oncologist, and I met, in our family, there's names of Beyonce, Cher, Madonna, and then there's George. If anyone who knows George, he's left, he's in California, but George Sludge. I mean, he's just a one-man name, wonderful man. I came to him because my other oncologist wasn't telling me what's coming down the pike. When I first saw George, he had more hair than me. I said, that's not fair. Oncologists, male oncologists, they need to be bald. And George has a way of telling you the worst news, and you can take it.
Right.
And have a sense of hope, even there may not be hope. I mean, he embodies for me high level of intelligence. If you ever want to look up his credentials, they're a mile long. But he's a cheesehead at heart. I mean, he's like, what, from the Midwest, Packers guy, and he's humble. So that's the key thing, is telling your patients the truth. And granted, I know you have to judge it at times with certain patients, but just to let them know. And with your medical providers, you can sense the ones who have that inner ear of the heart, that integrity that will meet you. And certain days you're really tired and maybe have a hard time talking to them that way, but it's not another case, it's a person.
Truth-telling, whatever the direction is going, is so important. Jane, what do you need to say to us?
Well, what I need to say is that with my first cancer, I was nauseated for 10 months without any cessation. My nausea could not be tamped down at all. And this was really challenging for me psychologically. I did decide that I liked ice cream a little bit, but there were days when all I could stomach was like a half a cup of water and maybe a little chicken broth, and that was it. I just couldn't eat anything. It was terrible. And I think one of the things that really helped me was the counsel of my surgeon, Frederick Stamen, whom some of you will know if you're in the medical community, who convinced me not to pursue a subsequent operation. There was a physician who was really interested in doing special procedures on people with this weird type of peritoneal cancer. And Fred Stamen talked me out of it, and I'm here living proof today that that was really good advice. He also told me the truth. He said, if you submit to this particular surgery, you may not survive a whole lot longer. And I wasn't sure of it. I didn't really understand. So he really helped me understand that. The second has to do with the bald oncologist for my breast cancer, who was Robert Goulet. Some of you will also remember Bob Goulet from IU, who's now at Community North, I believe. But he is just a marvelous doctor. And I remember before my surgery, my breast cancer surgery, as I walked into the operating room, he just held my hand, you know, as the anesthesiologist was there to put me under. And I thought, that is really wonderful. That was just a very simple gesture of touch. But it completely allayed any sort of fear and anxiety that I was feeling at the time. And it was considerable because for me it was the second time through with this. And, you know, that is a very difficult thing to hear a physician tell you for the second time just a few years later that, gee, you've got cancer again. That's a very hard thing to hear. But I think that I would certainly concur with Jan here, who says that they've got to just tell you the truth. And, you know, if you find that you are with a physician who is hiding something or doesn't understand you as a person enough to know how much information you can have and deal with and negotiate, then, you know, you need to look for another doctor. It's important.
I love the metaphor of telling the truth and holding my hand at the same time, and how important both of those are. Well, I'm aware that we could go on with this conversation for a good while longer, but I'm wondering if there are some ways that you would like to join us in the conversation. Perhaps a question you would like to ask of one or all, or a comment about something you have heard. We do have a mic available. We need you to use the mic for our recording purposes. So if you just let us know, we would invite you to join this conversation.
I don't know how to say this, but through all of this, how did you pray? Did you ask for assistance in getting through your chemo, your treatments? Did you ask for God's will to be done? How do you pray?
How do you pray in this kind of situation?
I'll go first. Okay. I wasn't praying at first. I was basically, if God was still into smoting people, I would have been gone. I would have been fried. I mean, for the first 3 months, I was every four-letter word, everything else. Okay, there we go, I'm sorry. So I was gonna say the first couple months, if he was into smoting, I would have been gone because I was using every four-letter word. I was not a nice little person. I was angry, I was mad. So, I mean, I worked through that, and finally I got exhausted being mad, and no one comes to your own pity party. It's like, you know, it's like, okay, let's pick it up, let's, you know, figure this out. And then when I finally opened up, I kind of go back to the crucifixion, when he, you know, is nailed to the cross, he's the most, sorry, I don't mean to hate you, but this is the most open, vulnerable, and finally I just spiritually just went, okay, what? Now what? And, you know, is there going to be locusts? What's going to happen? And all of a sudden, that's when all these nuggets of people popped up out of the blue. You know, people showing up at work. Yeah, I'll come work for you. I mean, just all these little things. So I didn't have the Hail Mary. Being Catholic, I did my little rosaries and everything else, which was comforting for me. But so I didn't have a set plan. Maybe some other people did. I don't know.
What do you pray for? How do you pray?
For me, it was much of thy will be done, but as I've said, I just honestly believe from the beginning that God had already healed me, or if it wasn't healing, I wasn't fearful about death either because I'm saved, so that felt good. But then also, I mean, I actually arranged my chemotherapy treatments in the middle of the week because I wanted to make sure that I could be at church. And have that refueling and be around people that I know that cared, and again, to keep things somewhat normal. I always went to church. I grew up going to church, and as an adult, I've always gone to church. So being able to, you know, keep that connection with my church family was really important for me, and I know that they were praying for me as well.
For me, again, I grew up in the church as well. My mom had cancer. They had given her like a month to live. We all surrounded her with prayer. She ended up living another 15 years, despite what the doctor said. My dad, he had prostate cancer. So cancer was just another thing. And as was said earlier, what's for me is for me. Someone else will be going through something completely different. So it just depended on my energy level at the time. Sometimes it was just, God, I love you. Sometimes it was, whatever you want, Lord, this is for you. Sometimes it was, God, I just give it all to you. So it was a different prayer depending on what was going on that particular day. But the bottom line was, Lord, let thy will be done, because I knew that I was covered by the blood. I knew that. So if the good Lord wanted me to leave this earth, I was going to share his goodness and his mercy with others in whatever form that might be. Sometimes when I was going through my chemo, I would get on that medium called Facebook and I would send out a message of hope to others because I knew I was taken care of. While I was going through my treatment, there's a little book called The Daily Bread, which gives us an opportunity to read and be strengthened by that. And there was always a prayer at the end of that message. And a lot of times I prayed that prayer 10, 15 times while I'm sitting in my chair. So it just depended on what that situation was.
I would say that I have a kind of meditation, and it's based on something that St. Augustine said, and I brought it with me just because I wanted to read it out, because I think it's quite profound. And in fact, it's quoted in a wonderful essay by Leon Kass in a book that's come out recently called Malignant, and it's a book that's a collection of essays by medical ethicists published and edited by Rebecca Dresser. And Leon Kass says this: take care of your body as if you were going to live forever, and take care of your soul as if you were going to die tomorrow. For me, that is a really profound statement. Yeah. I think like you, Tony, I felt if it's my time, and I'm okay with that.
That's right. That's right.
If it's my time, I mean, this is something that we're forced to think about when we have a cancer diagnosis. You know, you're forced to think about your mortality. You may end. Right. And, you know, you can certainly hope not to. But I think, oddly enough, it dissipates any kind of fear that we might feel, many of us. Right. I did not feel fearful about death at that point. I really didn't. Right. So.
Thank you.
Okay. I was diagnosed with prostate cancer 5 years ago. And I thank God for the different people he put in my life.
Yeah.
God will give you what you need.
That's right. That's right.
When I went through this, for 20 years, I had the same doctor. Okay. He gave me biopsy every year, couldn't find nothing. But that last year, he found I had cancer. Okay. So he said, don't worry about it. I said, I'm not worried, I'm concerned about it. So I went in there. The first, he gave me 42 radiation treatment. Then it came back in my spine. Then he gave me 15. Then it came back again. Then the doctor said, well, what you got is in your spine. He said, we can't operate. He said, well, all we can do is to put you on medications. But I thank God. I thank God for everything. I don't ache. I don't have no pain or nothing. God has been so good to me. Amen. He has put so many good people in my life. Yeah. And the doctor I had, I went through a program, my first medication, the patient cost me $100,000. I couldn't pay it, but my insurance paid it. Then I came back and made this program treatment, where we take your blood out of your body and send it to Atlanta for 3 days, and a week they put it back in. I had to lay it on the table for 3 hours and a half and couldn't move. Put my blood back in, come back in. Right now, my pH it's down to 0, 0, 0.
Amen.
The doctor tell me, he said, I can't understand why this. Right there, when I go out there, they call me the miracle man. I said, that's the miracle man.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
God, thank you.
Hallelujah.
Man.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
Good evening to the panelists. I am Elder Hayes' baby brother. So I too have the experience of having lost a father that I never knew at the age of 3. I lost a grandfather from lung cancer, a grandmother from leukemia, a sister at 55 with breast cancer, and more recently, a mother at age 83 that I went to every part of her treatment with her. But my question to the panel is, in terms of sensitivity and being politically correct and saying the right things, can either of you recall a moment where someone just said the wrong thing to you? Or is there some kind of protocol or criteria that can be developed? Because sometimes we just don't know what to say.
Thank you for that question. It was on my list and we didn't get to it. Thank you. Because that's a great question.
I'm going to jump in real quickly here and just say that, at least for me, during my first cancer episode, I didn't lose my hair because the chemotherapy I was getting was delivered intraperitoneally rather than sort of into my bloodstream. And so I didn't lose my hair, and people would say, "You look great." You know, and here I was nauseated beyond belief for 10 months. So that's not a good thing to tell people that they look great. I mean, I think, you know, again, this notion of being present for people is simply sort of seizing how, you know, not even necessarily asking, how are you feeling today, but saying, you know, what's going on? Just, you know, need anything? Need anything? Need anything? Need anything? That would be a really good thing to ask people.
To stop talking about the cancer, because you're not the cancer at all.
Yeah.
You know, it's
And
just,
the person with cancer knows they have cancer.
yeah. I mean, it's like, hello. No, I mean, ask me to go to a movie or something else, but let's don't talk about cancer. You know, so it's just be there.
To talk about this, the lady question asked, how do you pray? Over time, I have developed I've developed a priority in prayer, and that from actually doing the eulogy at my sister's funeral, which drove me to pray much, that David, when Bathsheba was pregnant with this child, with this adultery, out of this adulterous affair, and she was about to lose the child, that David was in his room praying fervently that God would let this child live, and even though it looked terrible. And they thought David was so bad off that he was going to kill himself. And the moment they came and told him that the child had died, he said he got up and he bathed, he put lotion on, and he came out and said, okay, let's move forward. And they couldn't believe it. They said, how can you do this? He said, well, I asked the Lord for what I wanted, and what the Lord wanted was something else, so now I'm moving on. I have a priority in prayer that I will always, if you bring me to the hospital to pray for your 95-year-old grandmother, I'm going to pray that God heals her first and foremost.
Yes, right.
That's what I'm going to do. And second of all, then I'm going to move to that place where, and the reason I'm that way is because Paul told us in the book of Philippians, be careful for nothing. And so I know that God is bigger than my problem. And so I can ask God for anything. Now, if he wants something else out of the situation, now I can still depend on his word, because he said all things work for good to them who love God, the called that are according to his purpose. So even in the worst situation, and while I have the floor, let me say this. Don't call yourself trying to protect people too much from your illness. My wife probably has to repent, because she really is back to this superwoman thing. That she's back to that. She runs and does everything. So she's probably going to have to repent of that. You know, I've learned to slow down. But, you know, one of the great blessings, I forget who said it. Somebody said that a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, but an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. And when we told our children, it was a gut-wrenching thing when we told our children that their mother had breast cancer. But my children, they've all been athletes, the youngest, who was getting ready to go to college. Yeah, she was getting ready to go to high. Well, Camille had gone off to college, and so Meredith had gone off to college. Camille was getting ready to go to high school. Camille had made it.
Let's get your stories together, okay?
We do have the same children.
I didn't find out until later, until I was listening to Camille tell her cancer story on YouTube, that when she went to high school and found out her mother had breast cancer, she said, well, this would probably help my family, knowing our financial situation, if I could see to it that I get a scholarship so I can go to college. And she did it exactly that. Excellent grades, and she ended up getting a track scholarship to go to college. She graduates in May, as a matter of fact. And so this situation, this negative situation, was able to charge even our children to grow in ways that you cannot imagine. So really, let them feel the pain, because they will grow from it.
One of the things I wanted to mention too, real quick on that, is, and I noticed it just this evening with each person that spoke. It was real clear. Everybody, each one of you had some optimism or some way to experience some joy or find some power or something good in it. And I was soliloquizing in my mind, and I thought about a little scripture that God has interjected in the Bible, almost in the middle of the Bible, almost in the book of Proverbs, I believe. It talks about a merry heart is almost like castor oil. I look at my parents' medicine, but it's like medicine. And while on the other hand, it's kind of difficult to find some moments of joy, even in times of sickness. But on the other side of the coin, if we can find some ways to bring some smiles, that I've seen it work wonders and do amazing things. I remember Tony's mother, she was, I think, at Methodist Hospital, and I went to visit her, and I was trying to be a pastor and trying to do the right, and so I said, now, okay, I'm going ahead and leave. What kinds of things can I do? What can I get? Can I go and get anything? Would you like a special meal? She was not having a good day that day. She said, Pastor, if you can go and get me a T-bone steak, and I want it well done, and all the trimmings, and I want some dessert and ice cream. And I said, okay, let me make sure I got it. I said, I'll be right back. She said, no, Pastor, I don't have an appetite. I was just kidding. But she interjected. She sneaked in some moments. Her husband laughed. He smiled. She smiled. I smiled. It kind of lifted. Joy has a way of lifting us.
A response to the things to don't say, I was a young chaplain, still trying to figure out how to do that work. Walked into the hospital room, was good enough that the young man in the bed started telling a story, and very quickly told me that just the day before he had been told that he would have less than 3 months to live. He was about my age. And I looked at him, I said, oh my God, you don't look that sick. Not a good thing to say at that point. He was a kind fellow, and he allowed me to stay in the room. I recovered my composure and was able to hear his story. I tell that story because even though we say the wrong thing sometime, as long as they're kind, folk are going to be gracious, as long as we are gracious back. He may have thrown me out of the room. I have been thrown out of the rooms before, but I would find a way back in. And so even when we say that which we wish we had not said, it will be used somehow if we're gracious, and most people will be gracious in return. It may be an angry day for them. They may not be gracious at that moment. But they will be gracious at some point if we find ways. So I have long worried about the things to not say, and have finally decided there's not a lot to not say as long as you're kind and compassionate with where you are. We recover with each other one way or another.
I think we might also add to that that being gracious can bring grace. And
Amen.
that's important.
My biggest question for all of the breast cancer survivors that I have met or known or have seen, how did you feel when you knew that your chemo and most of your struggle was over, and you know that you could actually go on with life knowing that you've survived something, or knowing that you have accomplished your biggest fear in life? How did you feel when you knew that things were going to be better for you in your situation?
Great question.
You're one deep child.
Oh, you have an answer? You go ahead. Oh, I'm not sure I have an answer other than, for me, once I got through treatment, and I just kept thinking about God has brought me through this. And it really hit me because while I was in treatment, several other people that I knew that had breast cancer had died. But I was living, and so for me it meant God has a purpose for me. He left me here for some reason, and I sought out to find that purpose. And I think I found it when I was ready to try to go back to work. And I ended up where I work now, which is at Gennesaret Free Clinic. And every day I'm able to serve people, help people who are in vulnerable situations, much like I was, and to be able to connect them with resources, to be a support system for them. And I continue each day that just in my mind knowing God left me here for a purpose. And sometimes I go back to what my sister-in-law told me that day on the steps there about your battle is different. God gives everybody a different battle and a different purpose. So for me, it was finding my purpose and living that out and letting God's light show through me in what I do, whether it be in my job or at church or wherever I am. So that was, I think that answers your question.
Chemotherapy is by far the worst part of cancer. For me, it certainly was. I think it is probably for most of us. Knocks you out. And even if you have radiation after that, which I did, which I think probably most breast cancer patients get, and probably prostate cancer patients as well, it feels like a walk in the park by comparison to having chemotherapy. But in terms of what it does for one's identity, one is never really free of cancer. That's the problem with cancer. That's one of the things that makes it a challenging disease, because it can come back. I'm reminded of a wonderful line in James Baldwin's story, Sonny's Blues, not about a cancer patient, but about a man and his brother who is a drug addict. And the man who is the brother, who is the solid citizen and so forth, has to come to the realization that it can come again. In other words, the brother who's the drug addict might fall off the wagon again. But we have to be all right with that. So I think that passing through that very difficult ordeal strengthens us in a way that allows us to be able to sit with that knowledge. It can happen again, but you know, it's going to be all right if it happens again. So.
That's really brave, because I'm not sitting with that knowledge, to be quite honest. I mean, it still scares the bejeebies out of me at times. You know, again, I'm not the kumbaya person here. So so since I like to think, I hate the word remission. I like to think I'm cancer-free. I haven't had any, so I live that way. Right. And I understand what you're saying, because I mean, you've had it twice, and I mean, knock on wood, hopefully not, but if it does, I mean, hopefully I'll have the grace again to deal with it. I mean, it took me a while to get it, then I had it. I think I have it. And at the end, when I got the all clear, I didn't want to take my port out, because my port was like my belly button to health, you know, because I hated the port being in. If you guys don't know what a port is, mine looked like a radio dial. It like stuck out here like a pig snout. It was weird. I thought I was gonna burst through. And then I have a horse, and I'd ride my horse, I'd feel it go up and down. I was like, oh, that's really creepy. And so, but then at the end, when I could have a chance to have it finally taken out, I was like, no, don't take my port. And then
I'll die.
I know. And so everyone's like, are you crazy? I'm like, well, yeah. And so, but then they did take the port out, and then I was fine. And then how I'm dealing with it now after 5 years is I've looked at my nutrition, meditation. I'm in tune with my horse and animals. So it's kind of helped me with it. And then helping my daughter now, who is graduating from high school, to do breast exams and to kind of understand what you put into your body. I mean, granted, there's genetics as well. But just realizing that this, as they say, I can't quote scripture, I'm sorry, but it's a temple, isn't it, somewhere in there? Okay, all right, good. I'm Catholic. We don't quote the Bible.
Thank you, Jan.
But so I just kind of realized that what we do with our body is really important. I don't take my health for granted or my body for granted anymore. Yeah.
Telling our religious and spiritual stories is a marvelous time. It's not easy. Will you thank the panelists for telling us?
And thank you for coming. There is going to be some refreshments in that area right there behind those two doors. And we can't thank you enough. Thank you for hosting this event, and thank you all for your honesty and your humor, your insights and your wisdom, and especially your faith tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.